Welcome to the Red Diamond Wargame Podcast. I am your host, Major Kurt Locker Honig, and joining me today is Major Colin Rusty Bogdan, representing the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab at this year's Commandant's Cup. Colin and his partner were finalists and ultimately finished in fourth place, just 1 point behind the third place team. Colin, thank you for joining me today.
Kurt, thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Please note that all opinions expressed are entirely those of the participants and do not reflect the United States Marine Corps, their units, or any other organizations of which they are a part. Why don't we get started by telling me a little bit about your background and how you came into wargaming?
Yeah, sure thing, Kurt. I attended the Naval Academy. I was a class of 2014 grad, and then I immediately got sent to graduate school, and I did 2 years of a master's program up at the Fletcher School at Tufts. And then finally started a typical Marine Corps journey, going down to Quantico for BOC, and then going to IOC, and then battalion life. I ended up in my first battalion, 3-2, in 2017, and did a deployment cycle to Okinawa. Then transitioned and did a non-traditional B billet where I was seconded to the United Nations as a planning and tactics officer for a peacekeeping mission in Mali for a year, which was fantastic and frustrating all at the same time, getting to actually use your skills in a combat zone, but doing so with a whole host of diplomatic oversight and other rules involved. And then I came back and went straight to California and did company command on a 31st MEU with 3-5 before deciding that I wanted a little bit of different work-life balance and switch over to the reserves in 2022 and joined the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, where I've been a project officer affiliated with the Infantry Battalion Experiment ever since.
Very cool.
Yeah, the wargaming, though, which is, part and parcel, but technically a separate part of my life, started when I was young with my dad and a couple of uncles who loved just to generally play everything from traditional Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 all the way to rather nuanced, die rolling, cardboard cutout games such as the Panzer Grenadier series from Avalanche Press. And so there were likely in any given year probably 5 or 6 Saturdays, Sundays where my dad and my uncles and my 2 brothers were sitting in the basement for an entire day, rolling dice and moving things around. And I didn't fully, it's most kids, you don't fully understand it. But over time you understand more and more, and you like just hanging out with people you look up to and respect, and you start having fun with it, and it kind of just became ingrained as something I enjoyed doing as a whole. On a funny aside, though, right, in a lot of ways, it's been a thing that's been held separate from my experience in the Marine Corps in a lot of ways, because the Marine Corps and the military doesn't wargame very much at an 05, 06 level outside of the planning process. And so this renaissance of sorts of trying to reintegrate wargaming in a more mass way has definitely been very cool in my opinion in recent times, especially given now we have the computer ability within the military to create these computer games, which are very much like the computer games I think many wargamers have played from Sid Meier's, whether it's Civilization or some of the Civil War simulation games that Sid Meier's produced 20 years ago that I don't think are any published any longer available, given they were probably like Windows 98-esque computer coding as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the Sid Meier's Civil War games are the ones that I remember playing, not understanding why I couldn't do certain things, because at the time not realizing they were trying to recreate historic events. So historical wargaming has its own genre and its own category. You mentioned that we don't really do it extensively in the Marine Corps. It's what we are trying to accomplish here is bringing more back. What kind of games brought you into the Commandant's Cup? You mentioned some of the digital games. What put you on the path to be a participant in the Commandant's Cup this year?
So I'll tie that back all the way to last fall when Tim Barrick, the director of the Wargaming director for Marine Corps University, reached out and put pretty sure it was an all Marine Corps wide message of sorts out via more admin about the top tactics tournament, which was going to be the MC Wargaming's director, first mass entry availability tournament with they were offering somewhere between 500-ish licenses or something to get people into it. And I remember I was on AT at the time, sitting in 29 Palms, for a couple of the new IBX battalions were sitting out there between 1, 2, and 3, 4. And I was like, well, I got nothing better to do. I might as well sign up for this. Like, it looks like super enjoyable. And then, in the process of the tournament, playing Company Commander Modern, one of the games we'll touch on later on because it was part of the Commandant's Cup, I found it very enjoyable. I ended up finding myself playing it a couple evenings on my own just against the AI computer. And I kind of was reinvigorated and kind of rehooked in some ways to Wargame in a way that was directly relevant, and coming from the Marine Corps rather than separate from the Marine Corps as a whole.
Yeah, I have to absolutely agree. Top Tactics is exactly how I got into my current appreciation for wargaming, and it was a stunning revelation to me that this was the first time they had done that. So there's going to be a lot of reflection on the hard work that Tim Barrick and his team have done at Marine Corps University to bring wargaming back. And obviously, Tim Barrick, the retired United States Marine Corps colonel, who used to work in the Wargaming Directorate for the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. So he absolutely understands the value. He wants to bring more wargaming to the Marine Corps because he recognizes its value. Now, leading the Wargaming PME effort out of Marine Corps University, Top Tactics was a fascinating way to really jumpstart a lot of this. And now, this is actually the second year that the Commandant's Cup has gone on. The previous year, he used a MAR admin. It doesn't seem like it caught near as much attention as this year's Top Tactics. So the goal, I am hopeful, is that this year's Top Tactics will continue to grow, and hopefully through these efforts that we're making now, even more participants. The level of competition will only increase because more Marines will have more experience, more Marines will be participating, and that should make next year's Commandant's Cup that much more challenging.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so when Commandant's Cup notification came out in late January timeframe, it was a natural thing for me to go, why, of course, why not? There's even greater stakes, even greater rewards involved with this to do what I'm already going to find fun. There's absolutely nothing to lose.
Yeah, and the preliminary rounds of the Commandant's Cup, like you said, started off with the Company Commander Modern, Hex War Games, which is one of the games that is found on the Marine Corps University cloud. Naturally, there's a whole process to be a part of that cloud, and there's only so many seats. So that's something that Tim has to balance. How many people can sign up for the cloud and occupy those seats that are going to be active participants in these tournaments? They're going to actively be using these games to make themselves better warfighters overall. Did you see a big difference in the company commander that we played for the Commandant's Cup versus what you saw in Top Tactics?
100%. And I think, as you know as well, right, like any Code Wizards, the company that's developed the software for Company Commander Modern, is updating it continuously now. As we're in I would say, an advanced beta of sorts. There were some glitches found, but generally speaking, the strategy as a whole had progressed a lot higher in terms of force design choice within Company Commander Modern, the placement of pieces, which ones are moving forward, which ones are you just holding back at the side of the board and letting affect everything. The level of competence from, I would say, baseline, significantly higher, especially in my qualification rounds of Commandant's Cup versus the Top Tactics things, which I kind of look back on now and go, man, I got lucky or blessed to get away with that junk in Top Tactics that I would never in a million years dream of doing now, especially against competitors like you, Kurt, or people I saw at Commandant's Cup who would have punished those mistakes quickly and unforgivingly.
Yeah, it definitely was unique. And so just to kind of set the stage a little bit, so Top Tactics, and we could spend a whole hour discussing Top Tactics, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to get a couple of Top Tactics participants from last year on again to focus on Top Tactics in preparation for Top Tactics 25. The premise was that you had 3 different stages of an infantry company. And the final stage was the force builder stage, where you're given a blank slate and a credit of 250, despite some rough edges in getting everything prepped, right? Ultimately, it was going to be 250 points of currency that you could spend across all kinds of different assets. And that was how we started the Commandant's Cup. You were given 250 points to build your your American modern company, and how did you go about building your company?
My company I largely, I mean, went for a very traditional mindset of like, I'll have some of these things with drones, but I took as many LAVs as I could, thinking traditional firepower. And as company commander, I would say to some degree you can fight the computer games results, or you can understand that the simulation is probably telling you something better that you're not listening to. Over time, like where did I go from an LAV company? I would be reinforced rather heavily with assets we would look at an LAV company reinforced today. It progressed to me going like lighter, like ULTV-esque, with as many loitering munitions as possible, is where I ended up at the Commandant's Cup. So an interesting progression of like, I want these ACV-30s, I want these LAV-25s that I can shoot either toes or 25 millimeter Bushmaster with, and now leaving a lot of that stuff behind, not because I think I'm better than it, but because the game shows unequivocally that it's not the winning asset it has been previously if you're playing the situation in the game.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I followed a very similar evolution where I tried to preserve an LAR company just to have Bushmaster cannons out there thinking they'd be highly effective. The problem is that the infantry fighting vehicles on the Chinese side had missiles that were very good at killing those things. and I think accurately, ULTVs and JLTVs were surviving the infantry fighting vehicles a little better. And I think a part of that is just a reflection of you don't want to waste a missile on a reinforced Jeep whenever there might be a ACV somewhere else that needs to be killed. And the benefit of now downsizing that immediate combat power is I could stack my resources a little bit better. You already mentioned your drones. What other fire support assets did you really seek out in building your company?
All right, so I think this is the other element I was going to bring up. So traditionally, right, like we see a section of Cobras. I think traditionally we've all been taught in the last 20 years, don't think about air defense threats. Because generally the enemy we were facing and needing to deal with and act upon didn't really have any meaningful one. In such a sense that the infantry really needed to worry about it. It was the air wing will figure it out. They'll probably shape it off the battlefield, and we'll be back to where we have complete air superiority. But in Company Commander Modern, like the air defense threat of your enemy was a serious threat. And so in a lot of ways, right, I started with this section of Cobras, and I remember the first game of Company Commander Modern I played in Top Tactics, they survived the air defense and basically obliterated everything off the field, and I was done by turn 6. Real proud of myself. But in the second and third stage, and then definitely by the time we get to Commandant's Cup, the helicopters were more of a liability than a help.
That's right.
You're spending up to 15-20% of your point total that you can use to design your force, and they're likely, if you have a good man-pad or shorehead system threat, going to be gone within 2 turns. And so you've just spent all that points for a fire support asset that's gone as a whole. And so the rocket and missile battery is where I think a lot of people have ended up. It's definitely where I've ended up favoring in terms of a lot of things, in terms of the HIMARS usage, which oddly enough, right, if you look at Ukraine, has paid off both in terms of the air defense and the missile/rocket battery usage of like, well, what are they using over there to fight these same things, right? Air defense is a problem, can't break through or gain air superiority in a lot of ways, and what are they using for? They have tubed artillery, but in all reality, they're striking major targets and shaping things with these missile and rocket batteries in large part. And so it's, oddly enough, the computer game is reflecting what real life is telling you, but not necessarily what our previous training and historical experience is informing us as a first guess in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And that's the huge benefit of all this. And one of the best benefits that we keep highlighting, and one that I hope it's communicated effectively to different commanders that are questioning, how do I bring PME to my Marines? Like, how do I teach these guys? Is it just going to be TDGs? I argue wargaming brings this really powerful element in learning about the adversary's capabilities. One of the things that we picked up very quickly is that the Chinese force does have a lot of, just like you're describing, the air defenses, the ability to shoot down something that we've taken for granted. And nothing is going to sell that faster than someone playing a game who is expecting their F-35 to have complete autonomy across the skies, or expecting their Cobras to be able to simply waltz across the battlefield picking off all these different armor assets. until it gets blown out of the sky. And now all of a sudden they're having to think again, okay, what is the proper sequencing? How am I shaping the battlefield correctly in such a way that I can be successful in this environment?
No, for sure. I'd say the F-35 aspect, given within the game they sit off map, so for people listening, that means that they're just basically untouchable. But to not allow them to become such a unstoppable asset, you have a very limited amount of strikes, generally 4 in any game. It kind of forces you to think, well, I don't have this unlimited sortie generation, which with an exercise land or within, in 29 Palms world, you always generally have enough sorties to shape everything off you need to shape. You're never short and then sitting there for a day or 2 days waiting for, a setting of conditions that couldn't happen the first time, and now that you don't have resources to do it as a whole. I think the other aspect interesting there, Kurt, when you talked about the missiles and use of anti-tank missiles, the mass, or the idea of having mass and just survivability, because an element of the game speaks about like maintaining at least 40% of your force. If 60% of your force is wiped out, it's an automatic victory for your opponent. And so, like, in a lot of ways, you have to play this game of like, I can have, for example, or sake of a number, 10 super capable assets, ground assets, or I can take 30 less capable, but good enough if you've done, your homework right, things. And so therefore my opponent has to kill a host more things to get to the same point than he would have initially. And so, wow, it's like, does mass have a quality? Yeah, it really does. And force design pushes us in a sense, we can do a lot more with less. Budget pressure from Congress has pushed us for decades to go, you can do more with less. But when it comes to, pitched conflict, having a whole bunch of stuff that you can, take a punch with and then punch back with has a quality in and of itself. And oddly enough, that's a lesson that, has been borne out in Ukraine quite a bit, where they have manpower struggles, and they would love to have more people, and they'd love to have more assets, they'd love to have more ammunition, so that they can continue on fighting.
Absolutely. That's a fascinating lesson, that something that a computer game can teach us. So definitely something to pick up on and kind of digest. And it does help the Marines at that fundamental company tactical level recognize, all right, this is the piece I play in all of this, where I do have some assets capable of defeating these things. And if I do that, then the force as a whole can be successful. It's not going to come cheaply. We're no longer in an environment where we expect a 100% success rate. And even with the odds stacked on the blue side, it felt like a little bit at Commandant's Cup, there were still a couple of moments of like, damn, I lost something that I didn't expect to lose. It's not ever going to be a perfect situation.
Yeah. And I mean, in the way the scoring worked, I mean, given the quality of people at Commandant's Cup in terms of playing, like, you're you're talking about, within Company Commander, a couple points, and losing an asset or two gave the other guy, right, 2 more points to their point total. And even if they were going to still lose, right, those 2 points added up to where maybe on average between the 2 mirrored games being played, like, technically they won because they were able to trite you, 1 extra helicopter or 5 extra tanks than you were able to them in the reverse situation. And so it's yeah,
absolutely. The scoring was a little challenging. I know I suffered personally, no disrespect to my opponent, but that was it was a balance between, are we playing for 3 hours, or are we playing to turn 20, or are we playing until, no kidding, 60% is a traitor or not? Because I had a moment even as red, where it's like, all right, we're at the 3-hour mark. I technically have more living assets than he does. Can we call it good? Like, no. Now we need to see if we can finish this. It turns out I could not. I could not withstand the ultimate blue advantage in terms of, frankly, I was out of ammunition. So even though I actually had established air superiority, I was out of ammo. So that air did nothing for me at that point.
Honestly, there's an inevitable element of the die roll for some of these games, which is both very fun and frustrating, all concurrently.
Well, and it does highlight a piece to all of these games that we played, but for wargaming in general, it's easy to call it playability, and playability is important. The ability to communicate the rules, to understand what's going on, that's important. Also has to be fun. If it's not compelling, if it just turns into I'm going to flip the board over because I'm tired of losing this game, that's not fun.
Hmm.
But if you understand the reasons how the die roll a certain way, and you realize it's not you losing because red is drastically underpowered or blue is significantly overpowered, it's because of the choices that you made.
Yeah.
So reset the board and try again.
Hmm.
And that's that playability, that compelling feeling of I can do something better. Let me try again. And
Yeah.
that's something I think Company Commander does achieve. Do you feel like the Flashpoint campaign, Professional Edition, achieve that same level?
Ooh, I mean, so we played the 3 games, right? Company Commander Modern, Flashpoint campaigns, and JTA. And I think Company Commander Modern is getting there to where it's going to be your own choices, and you can get to like structural, positions of advantage where you just chose better than your enemy did or your opponent did, and you deserve to win. It's less about the die controlling everything and being random chance. I think Flashpoint, for me, it was less just so buttonology and so nuanced computer game wise that I struggled to form a really good opinion. And I mean, you and I played each other in Eckert during the round robin, and to some degree, I think it does have an interesting aspect to playability, but it just requires a lot of upfront knowledge and usage of it to the point where those who had just done it a lot more than other people were inherently better at it, rather than there being a baseline of knowledge where you could test competitor skill versus knowledge of the computer game, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. I do think there's a lot of interesting lessons to be learned in terms of, how we want a level of realism, but if the ability to communicate, to translate that realism turns into just knowing the game, you're always going to have advantage by someone who has played it more, who understands all the buttons more. I felt disadvantaged because my opponent in the prelims kind of bailed on me, so I didn't get to test all the buttonology. I didn't get to really learn how to make all the buttons do all the things that I wanted. And even then, we still found ways that we all felt we could improve the game mechanics, but the improvement is going to require its own set of buttons. So at some point, you start creating this game expert is going to be very good at testing the different operational decisions and tactical decisions that the game is actually trying to test.
And I think Flashpoint has a purpose. I don't know if it's really an entry level or even intermediate, like competition kind of level wargaming purpose, as much as it probably would serve really good for like unit level, like deployment, other type of wargaming purposes at a higher level as a whole. Which, from what I understand from the people who helped design it and were there at the Commandant's Cup, it has been used to help at the COCOM level. Simulate some scenarios and give them some ideas, or reveal some risks to them that weren't previously considered. And so I think it probably works really well for there. Kind of hard for a 1v1 or even a 2v2 type of match setup, especially under a time pressure.
Yes.
Give it some elements of how the game just functions inherently.
Yeah, and we've heard some good feedback that Marine Corps University, for EWS, for command and staff, like they are using the game less for individual students, but for students to create operational planning teams or even to represent staffs where they will create the plan, and that simply gets communicated to the person pressing the buttons. And so now that player is not necessarily a Marine, it's a staff, and you're testing the decisions that staff has created. Yeah. So in that way, that still becomes an incredibly valuable tool for PME even in the fleet, where if a commander wants a staff exercise to go through the process, then they can actually test, did the plan create something that was going to achieve the commander's objectives? And that's a great opportunity to work on both red side planning and blue side planning. Okay. So now you do still get to gain a benefit of, these are the capabilities that red has. These are the capabilities and limitations that blue has. This is how my plan came to be. All right, what did we learn from either the successes or failures of that plan, and let's run it again. It's the repetition process. And it's not spending Marines sitting in tracks testing out a plan, which is great. They can be somewhere else playing Company Commander Modern and learning some other things whilst the staff is actually working through a slightly more complex game.
100%. I can even imagine, and I have a couple times over the last 6 weeks or so, where you could be given this to units in McCree, where it's like you don't need to get them into the sim center where the MEF sim centers are always booked up to wazoo and they have a specific staff and there's like set scenarios that are programmed in. But right, Flashpoint Campaigns is an outside coding team and we'll take scenarios and develop them. And right, you can put people on Flashpoint Campaigns, you can put units on it and have people do it for the McCree, and they've wargamed at a higher level than what you can do just purely on an over the map war game in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really fantastic note. Was there anything else that you wanted to see come out of Flashpoint Campaign? Any improvements that you would recommend to that team?
Ooh, I don't really think so. It's not my favorite, so I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about
Okay.
it. But it's definitely got its usage. It just doesn't speak to me at a personal level of I don't know, playability and fun personally.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation with a couple of the other participants in. I thoroughly enjoyed the amphibious component, and I think it really does shape that an amphibious assault can look and take a lot of different forms, but this had to limit some of the different decisions, the operational decisions, just based on the situation. There was way too much opportunity for red to get there fast,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that how you tweak the scenario so that it doesn't turn into a 4 or 5 or 6 hour evolution. You still need to keep it within a 3-hour round domain, but there needs to be a scenario shaped in such a way that you do have to make an operational level decision. Am I coming in from the left or am I coming in from the right? Before you start getting into the tactics of this is the unit that I want deployed on helos, these are the ones I want on boats, these are the ones I want on ACVs, ready to go.
Yeah.
And I think that will continue to further that challenge. Like, are we effectively using the MagTaf? Does the game effectively actually teach that integration of the air, the ground, the logistics components? So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Just some minor tweaks that hopefully don't result in more buttonology, which might deter some future wargamers from getting super interested in that platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
What do you think about then? We're talking about buttonology, so now to shift away from the computer games, we had the opportunity to play a tabletop game. So now you're physically rolling the dice, you're physically moving your counters across a map, and this was Joint Tactics Arena. This is the tournament version of Tim Barrick's Operational Wargame system. What were your thoughts on JTA?
I think most enjoyable, best game that we played with not I think just on its own, but also like best game of the three for like tournament timed play as a whole. And it was remarked, I think, somewhere prior to the tournament that it's been called. I believe Tim probably sent it out that it's been called a knife fight in a phone booth, and I think it's 100% accurate in that sense. Where you better come out swinging because otherwise, right? There's no playing passively. Just like in the real world, if you don't come out swinging, someone's going to punch first, and you're going to pay that price, and you're probably never going to catch up as a whole. And then in the other sense, it just like let's say a real world aspect, there are so many domains and variables that exist that you're never going to defend everywhere. You're going to have a vulnerability somewhere at some point, and the question is whether or not you're able to keep on punching in other domains and mitigate the damage in the ones that you potentially got caught in. And it's a constant. You have a plan, and you're going to adjust your plan. I loved it in every sense, especially given you were looking at a human being across the board who could be like smiling in 1 second and frustrated and flummoxed because their plan just got thrown out the window the next.
Yep, absolutely. I was telling Tim that was the best advice, the best feedback I could ever give about a game. It was like, I just spent 3 hours playing this game, and all I want to do is reset the board and play again.
Yeah.
And I lost. That was just I want to do it again. I don't like what I did. I want to try something new. I want to try something else. The amphibious assault wasn't it for me. I kept trying to set certain conditions. I kept trying to limit different things that I thought my opponent was trying to do, and then the amphibious assault. It felt very, just because you got to have naval actions
Mm-hmm.
as a part of the turn, which I thought was very, very good, but the ground component was limiting.
Yeah.
The beaches simply aren't close enough to the towns
Yeah.
to immediately put the impact that I needed my opponent to feel. So he was in a situation where he could easily defend, even though at one point I had 4 brigades staring down this town and I couldn't beat him. And so
Yeah.
that was an enormously frustrating scenario of like, what else can I do? Like I've done everything right. All right, let's start it over. Let's try again.
100%. I mean, the first time, because the round robin, for most of the participants, they'd only ever played, it was the first introduction, and then like you play it right that afternoon, was what our group did. And some of the participants who had competed last year had played it a little bit. My teammate, Lieutenant Colonel Ace Eckert, had gotten a beta copy that he played a little bit, but in all reality, the rules had been updated in some ways. The map had been updated in some ways. So generally speaking, right, like there was no prior knowledge or super effective prior knowledge, as everyone was coming in the same baseline learning rules and having to suddenly implement them, which was a wonderful, application of a lot of things from MCDP1 in terms of like the human dimension and friction and uncertainty. But in the first round game, I played Colonel Glenn, the 13th Mu Commander. And right, you're staring at somebody who's like, literally commanded a MAGTF. And I tried probably 3 or 4 different things where I was swinging, trying to punch, and I missed 3 straight times. And it came with some cost, as it inherently does, both in the real world and in the game. But it took until the final 2 turns in which I finally got through, thankfully, and was able to win. But man, like, I'm sitting there going, was I foolish to try? Was I silly to try this? Like, I'm just 1 step short. I learned to respect a combat air patrol far more than I ever had before, in a lot of ways, and the effectiveness of having one up to foil the other person's offensive plans in some ways. And so it was just a thoroughly enjoyable experience, to the point where I mean, Colonel Eckert and I spent easily 3 to 4 hours just chatting about strategies for the game and different opening gambits and things you could do, because the computer games are fun, but I don't know, the most involved and most like excitement and exhilaration of like being in the attack or actively fighting a defense came from Joint Tactics Arena, bar none.
Well, and you're playing experienced warfighting professionals, so a lot of these are not going to follow a bad plan all the way to their demise, like a computer sometimes will.
Yeah.
And that's always a fascinating challenge of like, I could never figure out what this guy's plan is. And it's like, well, it's probably because they're human. They're pivoting. They're recognizing the circumstances have changed. They're making a new decision, and they're forcing you to react to that decision. And the challenge on you is, can you prevent them from achieving any of their objectives? Well, like whatever it is they want to do, you're in a situation to foil it while also pursuing your goals. One of the most compelling components in my mind has to be the points system. We talk about the towns and the bases, how those can be dramatic swings, because you don't just gain points by seizing those objectives. Your opponent loses points for doing that, and those become incredibly powerful targets. There's a lot of great defenses, though, where you have your missile defenses, you have all these other different assets that don't create any points for you. So destroying those is incredibly important, but it doesn't feel as worthwhile, because you might be stacking chips off to the side of the table, but none of it matters. Nothing the same way as sinking a ship. And I always say that I'll never blame the dice, but I never once got to have initiative for all 3 turns.
Oh my goodness.
I missed all 3, and then when I got my sub into the fight, it immediately got detected. And it was just one of these, like, I didn't even get a single torpedo off. Like, that felt awful. And I recognize, right, it's not about having an overpowerful submarine that's just able to start picking off the fleet. You don't want that. But, boy, that was a real tough string of luck, because that naval action just dried up real quick as soon as that sub was detected.
Which essentially, right, like for everyone's essay, right, like that's a 12% or less die roll that Kurt lost.
That's right.
That you're like, you have to bank on being able to win, otherwise you'd never be able to plan. And then essentially it turns into your other opponent, your opponent having a second turn in a row with no action taken effectively, except you revealing where your units were.
That's right.
So it's like,
and that's I I I thoroughly enjoy the game, and there's been some great feedback on the value of the cards.
Mm-hmm.
I've played a similar game. If you've heard of Major's Gambit, something that came out of one of the professors at the U.S. Army's TRADOC,
Okay.
and the one of the compelling components of their game is that you have to pick basically a river of 3 cards, kind of similar to like a joint capability card from Littoral Commander,
Mm-hmm.
but it has an effect over the whole battlefield, whether it's friendly or enemy. But you can't change those cards. You gain a new card at the end of every turn, but you're still stuck with those 3, and so your plan is tied to those 3, whether it's to disrupt the enemy's plan or to further your own. And sometimes your card becomes worthless. And I think that's a really compelling challenge that we don't want to lose. And I know some people were not very supportive of those cards, but I do think it forces you to choose: am I focusing my efforts in the air? Am I
Mm-hmm.
focusing on the sea? Am I focusing on the ground? And I think that's incredibly important because it changes. It forces you to make compelling decisions that are going to dramatically change your capabilities within the game.
Oh, 100. I think the cards, to be honest with you, Kurt, I think the cards are the critical planning, where you bring the planning element in rather than just this reactive, like punch, punch, punch aspect. Because in a lot of ways, right, you have the 4 cards that you'll set in a row and have as scheduled. You can't really change their order. And then you got the 2 extra on-call cards that you can like slot in wherever you want within those 4, so you have 6 total cards per turn. But the thinking, right? My teammate Ace Eckert and I spent a lot of time thinking, and Tim Barrett gave a brief snippet of wisdom in his intro to the game prior to everyone playing it. But like thinking about, wait, like if I win initiative for the first turn, and I'm going to be able to go first rather than second, do I, right, like, is my game plan to use my first schedule card, or do I pull my on-call card out so that I have my ideal start, whether I'm going first or second? Within that schedule, right, like, do I need to do land action and then an air action and then naval stuff? And acknowledging, like, well, if I'm second to do the naval stuff, I might not, right? I might not have anything there. If I'm second to the land stuff, then, oh man, like, I might be reacting to him making a big penetrating push through something, and I'm not gonna be able to react to that for 3 cards because I don't have a land-based action card up for 3 turns, and he might be land to the point where I'm really in a stuck position.
Yeah,
and so
you're
it's
swimming.
Like,
Yeah.
and so I loved the aspects of the cards because in some ways it right forced you to think defensively while also still trying to acknowledge, like, I want to have decision points built to exploit opportunity if it exists. And sometimes you were just hamstrung. I say a lot of time in strategizing in JTA, trying to think about where you can gain points. Ace Eckert and I saw the naval arena as something where you could gain points, and then his experience previously last year in 2024 had been like underutilized in a lot of ways. And so we came up with some baseline deception ideas. And in the final round, the super final, so to speak, right, in the Commandant's Cup, I played naval action before my opponent did, had a couple of good die rolls, and essentially took everything other than a submarine off the board, and his next card was naval action. So essentially I gained 2 turns in a row.
Yep.
In a lot of ways, right? And that was frustration on the other side of the table, understandably from Alec. I would have been frustrated as well, right? Like if the table had been turned around, but ultimately, right, like it's real life, right? You can focus all your time planning on something, and the enemy has acted, an hour before you have, and suddenly you're reacting to their plan, and perhaps you have nothing you planned on having to go into the offense an hour later left.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's awesome. I am very curious to see how much more refinement Tim wants to do on the game before he releases it for purchase. And my hope would be that every major unit, probably every battalion, should have at least 1 copy. I would love to see that game being played in tournaments in the fleet. I'd love for home site drills to have JTA tournaments going on, just out of sheer exposure to not only wargaming, but the OWS system, the Operational Wargame system on which JTA is based, purely because it, more than any other game I've ever seen, really highlights the interconnectivity of all the domains. It is truly a multi-domain fight. And you're describing exactly the power of the combat air patrol. You're describing the power of an aggressive maritime component,
Mm-hmm.
and how that can affect your missile defense, because those
No,
ships are incredibly important in terms of missile defense. It's almost exclusively how some of those ships are used.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they can defend both ground units and naval units just kind of highlights like how you employ your fleet can dramatically change the way your game is going to be played. And I'm excited to see it be the bow put on it and it published. Even if it's not perfect, even if Alex still thinks it's a little unfair that his fleet got to be sunk before he could really do anything about it, I would like to see that game out there as rapidly as possible.
No, I concur wholly. One of the things I didn't mention in my background up front is I spent 6 months on ADOS at UCOM in the J43 as a FOPS chief, and sitting in OPTs on behalf, command OPTs as a J4 rep, and seeing a fellow Marine who's an 0505 running the planning meetings, but you're sitting in these slide decks, which, right, if you're familiar, having done a bunch of staff work in the Marine Corps prior to the joint world and even within the UN, a lot less assets or a lot more, a lot simpler as a whole, given, right, the complexity is a lot less. But you're sitting in a joint environment at a COCOM level and you're watching your component commands brief stuff that you're like, oh my goodness, like one, I didn't know this existed, but I guess I could have imagined it. But two, it's like, well, now we have like 10 different considerations for something like this, and like, how is that mixing with, right? Like, in Europe, USAFE needs this and that. Well, man, like, what is Navier going to say? Because the aircraft carrier can run, the air traffic control of that certain area, even though that the AOC sitting from USAFE is technically the senior air command authority, right? So you see, right, that's just one snippet of like all these different variables that are getting layered on and all these different assets, most of which, right, way too much for one human to comprehend in an effective manner and direct a planning process, right? Truly a decentralized, million variable type of problem with, tons of assets, which people are like, have we thought about this? And, you're sitting in a room of very smart people who are, not in a COCOM planning team because they're dumb. All of, some of them are going, oh man, never even thought about that, right? And it's like, we better get that in here, right? And JTA just forces all of that, right? You're thinking about missile density, like, well, what can I actually defend against missiles and other shooters from? It's like, well, I can do that via the sea, I can do that via the land, I can do that via this. How am I choosing? I can do it via the cap. It really just forces joint fluency in a way that I don't think I've ever seen outside of just lived experience. And so the game's great. And on top of that, right, I think it serves the larger strategic goals of like, if the Marine Corps is truly going to emphasize being part of the joint force, an uber capable, uber useful joint force asset, man, right? If we have the joint fluency ready to support whatever they need out of us, yeah, JTA does it, because it's something you don't necessarily see out of the other services inherently, just because they're way larger than us and we're smaller. But if we want to have the joint force value as us being fluent, ready to take everything and anything they need and think in that fashion, makes us valuable.
Absolutely. And I think JTA, for that reason, also becomes the gateway drug into the operational wargame system.
Yeah.
Where all of those mechanics already exist. Now you take away the cards and you replace them with a scenario setting. Like, these are the assets that you have because this is a 7th Fleet scenario.
Yep.
This is a 3MEF scenario. Now we're talking South Pacific, so you're looking at all the Chinese assets, North Korea, etc. Now you understand the mechanics of the game. Go solve this problem. If this happens, then how are we going to use exactly what we just talked about, that joint multi-domain integration to solve this problem? What does that look like? So I'm excited to see a proliferation of JTA so that more Marines are aware and playing OWS. And so as they grow into those staff planning roles, they have an insight that's just going to make them faster contributors. They've seen it. They've wargamed it in their minds. They've tried it one way. It didn't work. They reset the board and they try it again. It's going to be incredibly valuable in the future.
No, 100%. And you mentioned like when they get into staff roles, there's a lot of chat between was it Major Hessick, Colonel Eckert, and I at dinner that one night about a lot of the struggle for let's say big things or big fights that the Marine Corps is preparing to be ready for. Truly, comes from a lot of good staff work, right? Like we can win. We're really good at winning the final 100 yards, 100 meters, and teaching younger devil dogs how to do that. But it doesn't matter if we're not showing up on the beach or whatever location you want to pick. Insert the fill in the blank there. If the staff work ahead of time hasn't been extremely, extremely good,
that's right,
to get it there. And in JTA, and I think wargaming as a whole really forces you to think as a staff officer, which isn't necessarily sexy, but in a lot of ways, it goes right back to the roots of the Marine Corps.
Well, it ties exactly the roots of the Marine Corps, right? We talk about MCDP-1, warfighting, where we are trying to adopt this concept of maneuver warfare, and understanding that maneuver warfare isn't as simple as taking a fire team that is going to attack in a direction that the enemy isn't expecting, right? That's not necessarily a center of gravity attacking a critical vulnerability. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it is the staff work that is going to take that fire team and expand it to a MAG-TAF, whether that's a MU, a MEB, or a MEF. How are we going to create a critical vulnerability? How are we going to establish our center of gravity using the combined effects of all of these different assets that we have available? That is just as important as teaching those 4 to 6 Marines in that fire team how to do their job. In fact, I would argue, because there's a lot more lives at stake in those organizations, it's even more important. You have to understand what exactly is going on. And frankly, you owe it to that fire team to make sure that you have effectively done what you needed to do to set those conditions. We talked about Company Commander Modern and limiting that air defense, mm-hmm. right? Is that fire team going to have the air support that it has been trained to expect? Well, that's going to depend on whether or not the staff has done a good job of identifying the means by which they can eliminate that enemy's air capability. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're doing it. And that's why I'm very hopeful that we're able to bring this to all levels of the Marine Corps. How would you like to see wargaming proliferated? We talked a little bit about more involvement in top tactics, more participation in the Commandant's Cup. How else would you like to see wargaming within the active component and within the reserves?
I think I would say the first, I thought about this question in 2 ways. And I think the first way is just, Tim Barrack and the team at the Wargaming Directorate at MCU need to be given just more licenses. End of story. The money exists. We spend a lot of money, and I think we all know, right? Like regardless of one's opinions on the politics du jour of what's going on into the DC area and efficiency efforts. The Marine Corps and commanders within the Marine Corps have always had discretionary funds to put towards efforts that they think are important and timely, and something that you can't necessarily budget years out in a cycle type of fashion. And I would have to overwhelmingly, unequivocally say this is one of those things. If we're serious about being ready for big fights, then part and parcel of being ready for big fights is having a whole bunch of people who are thinking about those fights in a big way, right? I know a Chinese Orbat now almost entirely because of top tactics and Commandant's Cup. And it's not that I knew nothing before, ahead of time, but instead of knowing 2 things, I now know 10 things.
That's right.
Which, right, by the math there is 80% of my knowledge of the Chinese Orbat came from playing war games in the last 10 months. Mm-hmm. Right, invaluable knowledge. If you want, instead of the division or the MEF publishing, hey, a Chinese red cell, right, book on who you're facing, I could tell you how you're going to get people to learn it when they're, suddenly getting embarrassed while playing, or suddenly they're, they don't want to be embarrassed, and so they better figure out how to use a whole host of ZBDs, ZBD 05s, and how those, compare to a ZDT 05 structurally within a Chinese Orbat as a whole there. So get Tim the licenses he needs to be able to expand this thing way beyond 1,000 people as a whole. The other thing I think is super valuable, and it makes me think back to young lessons that you get lieutenants receive at IOC about, right? Commanders talk to commanders and this and that. And you think about it in this really small tactical sense, but right, when a priority comes from a commander, it's pretty clear and people get on board really quick. And when that commander's saying it is the commandant himself, I think the Commandant directing that this is going to happen, like unequivocally sets like, hey, guess what? Hey, O5, first level of selected commanders say, like, I get, right? I love your freedom. I want you to do this, but like, this is happening. This is a service-wide priority. Just like force design, we need to get on board and be doing this. Because it sets this expectation like, hey, cool, like, it's tough to schedule PME and it's tough to do X, Y, and Z. But guess what? It's not even my choice anymore, right? Like, you can hate me all you want, battalion, but the Commandant said we're doing it, and it's a good idea, and it's like happening because it's the second Friday of the month, or the third Friday of the month, or the second Tuesday, whatever works within a battalion life, right? Or a regiment's
Absolutely.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just sets this clear, unequivocal priority that it needs to happen, and it removes that like weird nebulous decision making from commanders where it's like, I got 7 things that are all important. Which one am I trying to do? And which boss, I guess, effectively am I going to piss off because I didn't do the other 6 things, right? Because everyone thinks their task is the most important task they've given you in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, give Tim Barrack all the licenses and the money he needs to buy licenses and expand it. And I would say, fully encourage, Colonel Mindorf, given you were my former boss at 3-5, right? Like, putting General Smith's ear, like, hey, like coming down and having Headquarters Marine Corps determine on what a like unequivocal wargaming policy and competition or tournament looks like for it to happen as a PME, removes the nebulous decision making from commanders when they're balancing their time and just says, hey, we're going to have to do it, and you find it in, and everyone from the corporal level or the lieutenant's like, you can bitch about it all you want, but Commandant said it's happening. It's not really a choice thing. It's are you a good Marine or not? Let's do it because it's going to help us. It's going to help us win.
Absolutely. I really like that point. It's one of the reasons why I like bringing up the Commandant's wargaming list to complement the reading list. A way to put the weight of the Commandant behind at this level. I want my E1s through E3s playing this game. I want my E4s and E6s playing this game. E7s and E8s, you're playing this game. E9s, you're playing this, right? All the way 01 through 03s. But really, I almost wouldn't say like, hey, if you have an O in front, these are the games you need to be playing. Because you owe every participant, every Marine, an understanding of both the tactical, the operational, and to an extent, the strategic level of what's going on. And these are the games that the Commandant has said, if you are playing these, and then resource it. So it's not simply saying, all right, guys, you should go play these games. Just like it used to be the Battalion XO's job to have a footlocker somewhere that had every PME book ready to be checked out, there should be a cabinet of games at every headquarters building that you have enough of to, at a minimum, be able to play and, to an extent, be able to run a tournament. I would, if this podcast ever became the catalyst for a fleet-wide tabletop tournament in which the Commandant said, I am going to one of these locations to hand the first place winner their trophy, but I'm not going to tell you which one. I feel like that would be a incredible incentive for those commanders to say, we better host a freaking exceptional tournament. That means my Marines need to know how to facilitate the games. That means my games better have all their damn pieces. That means my Marines better be engaged and know what's going on. And no one fails to benefit from that situation. And I think there eventually could grow into the regiment on regiment, battalion on battalion level tournaments where you're putting like, hey, my team is going to go play your team. We're going to play these 3 games. And I would love if somehow that eventually became a playoff series for something like the Commandant's Cup. And just like you're saying, expanding the number of seats. There's only 1,000 seats available. And Tim is having to fight off a lot of joint, a lot of allied participants. He wants that thing flooded with Marines because as soon as he's starting to fend people off, he's going to then get permission to get more. So whatever we can do to facilitate that, that's something that we owe to Tim to make sure that we're doing.
In a big way, yeah. He's if you think of like Ray as a commander, think like, who am I supposed to be resourcing? Like as a whole, Ray. If, my main commander decision is like, where am I putting resources and reinforcing rather than like, how am I driving action? Is like, he needs to be resourced. He needs to be reinforced. He is one of the main efforts, as much as that's a paradoxical phrase to use.
No, he's been called a national asset, and I couldn't agree more in that respect. All right. So the last thing I want to ask you, we talked about this, how we're going to bring more wargaming, the things that we want to see. What games specifically do you want to see Marines playing?
I'd like your. I mean, I'll say. I mean, if this Commandant's wargaming list is an akin to the reading list ever occurs, I think it's awesome that the grade, ranking grade kind of structure works there as a whole, because there are definitely some games that are better suited to the thinking you're trying to stimulate as a whole at certain levels. But I wrote down two, and I mentioned one earlier. One is Panzer Grenadier.
Okay.
And I think that's a great, right, like it takes the historical wargaming context in a lot of ways and brings it and makes it more relevant. The example I think in my head is 3-2, the first battalion I was a part of, was one of the battalions on the landing at Tarawa. And as the education officer within the battalion, right, I did more, or I felt an obligation to do more than just purely sign people's TA requests on occasion, because the 75th anniversary of Tarawa occurred while we were on deployment in Okinawa, and we sent a contingent of people down to Basio to stand on the red beaches, like right on the very beach that our predecessors had landed on 75 years earlier. Under
that must have been cool.
Yeah, under a lot of fire, a lot of hail, a lot of adversity, a whole lot of things, and so I think it made it more relevant and gave me a lot of perspective in terms of reading. Right, like Colonel Stephen Alexander's books, which he was one of the historians that wrote a lot in World War II, and he's probably one of the primary best writers in regards to the battle at Tarawa. And I'm reading these, firsthand accounts he's like been able to pull together and other things. And suddenly, I have a perspective on this battle that informs the battalion nickname of the Basio Bastards and a whole host of other things that right, maybe not directly relevant to 21st century, but like the human aspect of all that battle is the exact same human aspect that we see today, that we train to today. How did they solve that problem? How did they work out the fact that they didn't have anyone, that they knew on the beach, but they still had to coalesce together? And so I think Panzer Grenadier, and taking all those historical World War II aspects, which can range from Midway to Saipan, all the way over to Europe with Normandy landings. And so you're playing historical Germans or Japanese or Americans in the Pacific, Americans in Europe, in a lot of ways. And so you're getting to teach a PME battle. You can write the book or read an article, and then you're actually getting to play a battle in regards to that, to get in some sense, a feeling for the same problem that our predecessor, our forefathers were facing in the 1940s, depending on when the battle was, in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
The second one, and I think this is, Panzer Grenadier is probably a higher up, right? It's probably like an E6 and up type of system. I think the awesome recommendation that I could give, and it's a little bit, I think, kitsch, but it's an all rank thing. And I think the key aspect of it is that there's a ton of material out there for it, and a ton of thinking, and a ton of high level play that goes on that's non-military, even though its heart and its history is as a work game, and that's chess.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'm on a chess run right now in life quite a bit, but one of the key aspects that I loved about Commandant's Cup and getting to show up and spend a lot of time with Ace Eckert or you, Kurt, or the other competitors there, is to meet Tim for the first time in person, was getting to chat about strategy and develop strategy and think about strategy. And I could tell you, right, on the coffee table in my living room, just next to me here, there are 2 books which are in total about 800 pages purely on chess openings, right? And it was so awesome to be able to sit at Commandant's Cup and actually hear about, hey, like, how do you solve this problem? Or, have somebody go, I avoid that problem, I do this. I think you're asking the wrong question, how you handle it. And that was so enjoyable to do. It made me such a better player, even within that 72 to 96 hour time frame. It changed how I viewed some problems and how I approached things differently in some ways. And I love that about chess in that sense, because the qualification rounds were kind of isolating. You're on your own. You're playing this computer game. If you know 1 or 2 other people, you can chat about the strategy, but or tactics, but you really don't have this large compendium of like, man, like, what is the theory behind this? Whereas chess has centuries of theory written about it. Right? You have the Magnus Carlsen and the Hikaru Nakamuras of the world, who are these top level players who you can watch their games, or go on YouTube and look at their games after the fact and celebrate it on television, just like a sport. In fact, it's becoming more of an e-sport now that is developing into a big moneymaker within the economics of the world. But So I'd have to emphasize chess. You can play that with everyone from an E1 to a 4-star general. You have the same number of resources, and I think it teaches a lot of the same lessons in the sense that, right, like, hey, like, you're not going to win a chess game without giving up a piece. Mm-hmm. Like, that's reality. You can play it 75 different ways. The number of, right, there's 800 pages of opening theory. Why? Because there are that many openings that you can do. Within 5 moves of the game, there are over 1 million plus different combinations of moves, and so you're having to make a lot of choices strategically of like, where am I going to set up and not, and it's simple. Like, you can buy chessboards all over the place. It doesn't require special pieces, doesn't require special computer access, just requires the same 64 squares of the board and 44 pieces.
I think those are fantastic answers, and I really appreciate the thought that you've put into this. Obviously, Colin, this is one of those challenges that we're trying to take on. There needs to be more wargaming, more critical thinking that's going on within the Marine Corps. We saw a scratch on the surface at Commandant's Cup, and we're going to keep working our way to bringing more of this to the fleet. And I think with these insights and that attitude, this will be something that we can accomplish. I really appreciate your time. I look forward to, as we get closer to Top Tactics 25, we'll probably be reaching out again, trying to see about dragging it back on. We'll dive into that a little bit more and hopefully get some in-stride feedback into how that one's going. Say again, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your top 4 finish at the Commandant's Cup, and we'll hope to see you there again next year.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, Kurt. A pleasure to chat, and yeah, I hope to be able to come back because I think one of the cool things about Commandant's Cup as well was just merely getting to a community of people getting to talk about this stuff and chat about it in depth, because especially within the MFR, right, like, the currency comes from iterations and reps and sets, and how do you get iterations, reps, and sets? It seems obvious now in retrospect, but it's like, we should be wargaming and talking about it all the time, and it doesn't require you paying me drill points because I'll do it largely free of charge.
That's right. I like that. Thanks again for your time, Colin, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, for sure, Kurt. Always a pleasure.